Okay, today, we'll start now, week 3. You'll see where I'm posting the links to the YouTube channel, the computing at derby.ac.uk channel, and I'm actually giving you the links here so you can get to them easily rather than trying to find them mixed up in our very rapidly growing channel full of videos of lectures and what have you. So they will form the basis of your ability to revise. And the session last week that we did manage to record was the section about introducing the assignment. So we're going to start looking today at report writing. This could be interesting. If not, we'll have to go, here we are. Try that one, just found it now. There's an illustration there, folks, about some of the problems that we see with information technology. Although we rely almost implicitly on it, it is unreliable. It's quite surprising. We've been developing this technology now since about 1950, so that's 60 odd years. We have been developing and supposedly improving the quality of our information technology and computing and networks and goodness knows what else. And yet, it is becoming more and more unreliable. And we'll see that time and time again. As you go through the next 3 years here, you'll find more and more evidence of the sort of problems that we see with this remarkably unreliable thing called information communication technology. So it worked, third time lucky, fortunately. But I've got a backup. I've got my hard drive on which I've got the set of slides itself. So I came with options. We all need options with our IT. What we're going to talk about today is how to structure our writing. We're going to look also at how do we know that we're answering the right question. One of the problems we have from the academic side, the tutorial side, the teaching side is sometimes we see one of you guys maybe has created the most beautiful report, beautiful structure, brilliant analysis, superb logically derived conclusions, and yet it's answering completely the wrong question. That then gives us a really significant dilemma. From the perspective of critical analysis and all of those magical things you're supposed to be able to do as a graduate of the university or any university. Brilliant analysis. Superb citation support with a lovely set of references, and yet you haven't quite answered the right question. Oh dear, that could easily be 35% or 36%, so you're referral. So we'll look at thinking about a question, and the third part of writing, and this will come out in your article that we talked about last week and introduced and started thinking about in the workshop last week, and we'll do more and more this week, that's tomorrow, and on and on. How do I persuade my audience, the person or people who are reading this article, this report, this essay, this dissertation, how do I persuade them that this is a really good piece of work? That the answer at the end, the conclusions and recommendations, are actually really great, and they should take notice. So we'll be looking at some of those things as we go through today. Now, we have here in the university, we haven't actually got it actually in here, well, not very easily unless you've downloaded it. We have a product called MindGenius, which is a mind mapping tool. Has anybody ever done any mind maps? Oh, excellent. Did you like them? Were they useful to you? Some it's useful, some it's not. Again, the point about mind map and all sorts of other ways of organising your thoughts, we are all, as I said last week, unique individuals. What works for me may not work for you. What works for you may not work for me, and across. So we need to think about how do we develop that structure that starts at the beginning, goes through the various sections and subsections to that final persuasive, this is the answer. These are the conclusions, which are fully supported by the analysis during the main body of the writing, and this is the best possible answer, or at least a very good one. So if you have MindGenius, you can practice on it tomorrow in the labs, or you can practice on the PCs in the library and other general access PCs around the place. You can try this in the context of identifying the topic and then the structure of your article that you're going to write, that you're going to get right so well it will be part of that e-magazine, Computing for Everyone, that we're going to publish next year, next term. So what you need to think about, if you're using MindGenius, or if you're using PowerPoint or Word or something, this is the title. In MindGenius, in a mind mapping system, this title of your article fits bang in the middle, in that little cloud in the middle of the mind map. To try and keep your focus on this is what it's all about. Now, last week we started thinking about in the workshop these articles. And many of you during those workshops came up with 4, 5, 6 possible topics and titles. And then during the week, up till today and for tomorrow, I issued you a challenge. The challenge was to do some research, find a range of sources that could help you to actually understand and then write about each of those articles or each of those topics and titles. And then, from that, to be able to decide which of your 4 or 5 or 6 articles or ideas was going to be really great and could achieve that 95% band at the very, very top. How many of you have made progress on that, folks? Excellent, well done you. The rest of you, you've got another day until your slot with me tomorrow. The point being that if you've done that work and at least got a set of ideas, even if you haven't quite got to this is the best one, but you've at least got some ideas, then we can have a good discussion. I can discuss with each one of you tomorrow your ideas and help you focus on those. Those of you who've done all the work, those of you who put your arms up, then we can actually start thinking about that particular topic and then expanding on that and making it more and more focused, more and more powerful over the next few weeks. So, well done those who've done the work, and may I encourage those who haven't quite completed it to make sure that you have completed it by tomorrow, by the time you come to visit me in the labs for your workshop. So you put your title in there at the top of the page or in the middle of the cloud, which is where MindGenius will take it. So the next stage, and some of what we'll be doing tomorrow, is to look for guidance on writing reports and guidance on writing. Now, if you go down into the bookshop, you'll find very close to the front door a good display of books about studying skills and writing skills and all sorts of things that you need to know. You will have seen in the skills section of the website, of the library website, there's one of those tiles for report writing. Go there. Find out what it tells you about writing reports. Go and search on the internet for guidance on how best to approach the idea of writing reports and writing articles and essays. As you go to end up at each of these sort of success points in your search, make sure that you capture the details of each of those sources and build them into another working bibliography that you've got. These are your study skills bibliographies. Make sure that they are formatted to the Harvard standards. Not just a list of URLs, because you'll forget what those URLs mean, and if you want to use them at another time, then you'll have to do all sorts of extra work to capture all of the details. So do the work now. Build that working bibliography on how to be a great student. Resources that you're going to need over the next 3 years. Find guidance on the structure, and then look at what the assignment specification says. You will always find in any assignment that I set that I give you some fairly clear guidelines as to the content, the type of sections that I expect to see. Not necessarily just there will be an introduction, an abstract, an introduction, the body text, and conclusions, recommendations, and the bibliography. Those are pretty standard for everything. You will often find that on my assignments I will give you some structure within the body of text, the main part of the writing. Not always. And sometimes, like for this example, then each of you is going to develop a slightly different structure because you're choosing from such a wide variety of topics. So you need to start thinking about what are going to be your main sections. The introduction is only going to be about a paragraph or so, 5, 6, 7 lines, just to capture the attention of your audience, your friends, your family, who are going to want to understand why it is you come here, you're building up a great big fat student debt which you pay off at 9% of any income over £21,000, and why are you going to university? And so you can show them, if you want to, why it's a great place to be, why it's a great career, how it affects our own lives, how it affects their lives. You always have to remember that at the end of your writing, where you've done all the analysis, brought in all the evidence with all the relevant citations and so on and so forth, you will in the body of your writing come to, or justify, prove some conclusions, the answer really. But you need to remember that we humans are not terribly good at remembering what we've just read. And so the purpose of the conclusion section is just to very briefly summarize what you've already proved in your analysis in the main part of the text. So the conclusions and recommendation is always going to be quite a short part of your article or your report. It's a summary of the most important things that you've demonstrated and proved that you want your audience to come back to and remember. This will come into real focus in about 3-4 years' time when you're doing your research project, the dissertation project, and you've got a piece of work which is going to be, well, about 8,000 to 12,000 words long. The literature review may well be 4,000 or 5,000 words. And you will, at the end of that chapter, your literature review, you will need to provide half a page roughly to summarise the conclusions you've already reached in that 4,000 or 5,000 word analysis of the literature review. Because we can't remember everything. And so you need to point out at the end of each chapter the critical conclusions that you've drawn in your writing. Same goes here. 1,500 words, yep, you need within that probably a couple of hundred words or so for your conclusions, and maybe if it's appropriate, the recommendations. So that's the overall structure that you will need. Sometimes we give you a very broad sort of topic area, and this is one of them. It allows you to really work to your strengths, your interests, your passions. All you have to do is to find something that's really interesting about changes in the last 25 years and is going to affect us in the next few years or the 21st century. And it could be anything related to changes in computing technology, because anything that we can think of affects one of those three categories. Either communications, the way we entertain ourselves, or the way that crimes are committed and tracked down. Basically, that covers almost the entire field. So you always look at the assignment specification very, very carefully to make sure that in the structure you're building for your reports, or it could even be the structure you're building for your program that you're writing, see what clues we've given you. We tend to give you a lot of clues in the way that we write our questions. And any of you who end up taking modules where there is an exam, you will need also to look very, very carefully at how the questions are actually written. Get hold of past exam papers always and look at how they work. So the next stage is you've got a title now, and you've got some questions that come from the sections. Start using those as keywords in your searches. You think about, in the assignment, is it to do with communications? Is it to do with entertainment? Is it to do with crime, investigation, committing it, and so on? What aspect will really cover it? That's how you choose all of those very, very important keywords, which will get you the resources that you need, whether it's in the general internet, or whether it's in ACM Digital, or those other sources that I demonstrated to you in the workshop, where you go from the Launchpad to the library, and then into the various library services that allow you to search within those academic journals that we've got subscriptions to. So the question and the topic will help you to find all of those important resources. So then, having got them, as you track down each one, you copy all the relevant details that builds up that reference. Go back to the University of Derby Harvard citing and referencing document, go back to Plato and practice again and again until you get really, really good at building those citations and building those references. They're worth quite a nice proportion of your formatting section or presentation section of the assignment. There's really no good reason to throw away marks from that presentation section. It's actually a mechanical skill to do citing and referencing. Just practice until you are perfect. You'll need to do that when you get out into the big wide world in your placement year and in your future jobs. You need to follow those formatting and presentation standards. That's just it. Things have to be done like that. So build your working bibliography perfectly. And during the workshops, I will be able to answer any questions that you may have about doing that. So don't feel shy. We all have problems. I remember back in around about 1999, 2000, 2001, as I started doing my Master of Law, I'd never done formatting of references before. I just had to learn how to do it and deal with it. So I remember how hard work it was to begin with. And so I'm here in the workshops to help advise you. There's people down in the library who can also help and advise you. But I'm your first port of call in the workshops, folks. So if you have any questions, come and chat to me or call me over and I'll come and have a look at it on your screen. Yeah. Think about all of those sources that you've got. Now, if you're doing a good piece of research, it's likely that you'll have 2 or 3 times as many sources as you can actually build into your article. The amount of research that I did as an example for my master's dissertation, my working bibliography was something in the region of about 250 or more sources. In the end, I only used about 35–40% of those. But they were useful in helping me to decide what not to include in my writing as well as what to include in my writing. And so don't worry if you've got too many. It's always better to have far too many sources for your working bibliography than to have too few. And I'll be coming, you'll be able to ask me in the workshops, do these look good? Have I got enough? In which case I might well reflect it back at you and say, well, do you think you've got enough? If you can tell me why you've got enough, great. You now know what you're doing with your research and you know why that, however many you've got, is suitable. The whole purpose is to be sure that you know what you're doing, that you know when you've done enough, and you know when you can start the next section. Thinking about what is your message you've built up in your head from all of that research and understanding all those sources. You kind of now started, this is my question, my title, and you've worked through in your head, in your mind map, or whatever else. You've worked through, this is where I want to get to. This is what I want my reader to take away as the conclusion of this article. And when you've done that, you then can start building a logical structure from the beginning to the end. And if you think about it, those of you who've read all of the Harry Potter series, all 7 or so of them, J.K. Rowling, before she put pen to paper in terms of writing that very, very first one of hers, she had already planned out the structure of the whole series from the first page of the first book to the last page of the last book. She knew who most of the critical characters were. She knew the names or the topics of the various books. She knew the critical and key areas of the story in each of those. She planned it all out. And what you need to take from that is how to do that planning. Research, research, research. Think, analyse. Find some more sources. As some of your ideas say, I don't have the evidence. I need to expand. Go and do some more research. And then as you do that, you can build that logical structure that contains your own analysis, not somebody else's, yours. All of this stuff we're doing here, the reports you're going to write, are the way that we sort of critically evaluate how you think, how your critical evaluation works, your analysis. That will make every single one of your assignments unique and interesting and valuable. And to do all of that, you need your evidence. That's your researched sources in your working bibliography. So you come round now to what actually have I proven? Remind your reader what you have proved. What's interesting, what's valuable, what's important. These are sort of things you need to be thinking about. I'm going to keep banging on about this, about the formatting, because it's something that takes a little while for the message to sink in. I'm not interested, and we tend not to be interested, in the sources that you have found but not used. So the sources in your list of references are those which you have actually cited. Now, by and large, in the School of Computing and Maths, or Department of Computing and Maths, sorry, we are only interested in your list of references being your cited sources. Those of you who are doing the BSc IT and have business modules from our colleagues in the business school, sometimes, for very specific reasons, they will ask you to identify all of the sources that you found. In other words, your full reading list and the list of cited sources. Now, if that's the case, listen to what they say and do what they ask. Because they're doing it for a very specific purpose, which is they want to be able to see the breadth and quality of your overall research, which has informed your work, whereas we in the Department of Computing and Maths are typically just looking for those sources which actually are cited and support your analysis. Different purposes, different ways of working. So just be sure that you know which way you are going. Read the assignment spec carefully, listen to your lecturers carefully as they identify what they want you to do in your individual assignment that they set for you. Always ask questions when you have the opportunity. Don't just think, oh, I think I understand it, and then just as you walk out, oh dear, I've forgotten, or I didn't understand that, better go back, and you may have lost the opportunity. Or you can ask tomorrow in the workshops, that's no trouble. That's what the workshops are there for as well. So we've covered here the general way of writing and structuring, researching, building the evidence base, analysing it, structuring headings and subheadings and sub-subheadings as appropriate, and then leading that nice, simple path so that for your reader to go from the beginning to the end. You're trying to write in a way that captures their attention. How many of you ever watch any of those programs on TV, whether it's about gardens, where an expert is taking some people or taking the viewers on a journey through a garden or perhaps through a museum? Anybody there? One or a few of you. And no doubt your parents and possibly will watch them more than you do. Have you noticed that they are so careful as they choose the way that they present it, so that they cannot lose you as a viewer. Because one of the things that they don't want as you walk through the garden with them is that you suddenly find a really interesting rabbit hole over there and you get stuck down it while they're walking off there. Or you've seen something really interesting, or in the museum there's a machine or an exhibit which they haven't talked about, which is really interesting to you. And what you've got to do as you write is capture your audience, your reader's attention, so that they don't stop and think about something else. You've got to hold their attention all the way through those 3 pages of content, all 1,500 odd words. You have to anticipate the questions that they might start asking and answer them quickly, so they don't go off on a tangent and start doing their own research. Because if they're reading the e-version of your article, they'll be able to sort of stop and go onto the internet and research for the answer to the question that you didn't answer. So try and anticipate the sort of questions that your readers, your family, your friends might ask as you take them through this story about the changes and impact of those changes and where they may be taking us in the future. Try and predict what they might kind of pick up on. And then answer it. Use that so what principle that I talked about last week. Ask yourself all those questions. How does it contribute? Is it relevant? Does it make it more persuasive? Have I said enough or too little? Have I got the right examples? Or are the examples I'm using not actually terribly relevant? Because one of the things I notice often, both in student work and in the sort of professional work that I peer review with some of the journals that I'm a peer reviewer for, is that we all have some of those things which we're really, really passionately interested in, and we want a way of getting those things into our writing. And yet, actually, they may not be terribly relevant. They may be a bit of a switch off, a turn off to our readers. They're our passion, but we didn't connect it in quite right. It's not quite relevant. It certainly doesn't answer any of the so what questions. Cut it out. Don't build those things in if they're not completely relevant. If they don't move the reader to the next stage effectively. Just follow the instructions. In business, there's a term, JDI, just do it. And every now and then, you'll find supervisors or managers who are getting tetchy with their colleague because they're raising all sorts of questions, and then suddenly out comes this JDI, just do it, don't go on arguing. This is how it will be. It's a useful thing to learn for getting out there in the work. We may not like it, but it happens. So, where are we? Yeah. First of all, questions. Okay, right, the template is, I haven't uploaded that yet because the template is, well, you can use it if you want to, but you could also just do the outline of your article in an ordinary Word document. The template does not include the sections and subsections and so on. The template is to do with formatting, and very much of the time, I mean, for example, if I'm using or producing papers for journals or conferences, I will often use an ordinary, the normal template in Word, just so I can get the work done, the planning. Because often you'll find that these formal templates are block justified, so they have the text aligned carefully left and right column, edges of the column, and the amount of space between words is highly variable. So sometimes you'll see a space which is that wide, and sometimes the space will be that, and it's still only one space because it's using this weird proportional spaces with ends and ends and what have you to actually fill it up. And it's very, very difficult often to accurately put your cursor in the middle of where you want it to start typing some more stuff. And so if you have got this block justified stuff, it's a nightmare to edit. You can't sort of click and drag very easily because you're never quite sure which bit you've dragged from where to where. Whereas if you have the bog standard ragged right, left justified, it's almost always dead easy because you always have the same width of a space to actually use. So you can always put your cursor quite accurately, whereas within the block justified, it's a pain in the what's it. Seriously, seriously difficult. And if you're using a touchpad as opposed to a mouse, it becomes even more exciting. And if you happen to have a tablet with where you've only got the screen with no keyboard, that's really very, very challenging indeed. Okay, next question. About structuring or thinking about structure and logic and so on. Okay, what are the challenges you're finding at the moment in actually coming up with your titles? Are you finding challenges in coming up with a title for the article? No? Yeah. You mean? Yeah, okay.
Trying to find something that's unique enough, but that you can still find information on.
Unique enough, but you can find some information. Yeah, okay. Which sort of area are you looking for?
Looking in the entertainment area.
Entertainment. So, what sort of things could be covered by changing ICT technology in entertainment?
I have a general idea, but it's trying to find enough information on it. But then I've come across a couple of articles where it's been pretty much on the same vein of what I'm asking, and I'm trying to adjust it so that it's not the same article repeated.
Okay, now when you've got those articles, do they have any sort of reference at the back end that you can sort of follow up?
A couple of them do. I've been looking into their references.
Excellent.
I don't want to rehash what they said.
Okay, so you're succeeding already. You've got a couple of articles with some reference and you're following those out. Okay, now what you then do is go back to what I've been saying is, okay, so we've got topics, and it's what actually aspect are you looking at?
Sorry?
What aspect are you looking at the moment of communication entertainment?
The entertainment of online video.
Online video. Okay, so that could be things like whether it's YouTube or Netflix or all these other ones. And the way, so there's some interesting different impacts because some people are busy creating lots of content that goes onto YouTube. So you can look there at some of the interesting questions of how much of it is of any value for the future. You can look at it, the interesting topic, for example, that a small number of these home type videos and sort of semi-professional stuff, most of it is watched a few times, and yet some of it, for some reason, kind of goes viral and goes to millions and millions and millions of views. So there's perhaps an interesting question about human behaviour there. You could take it a different direction and look at the impact on TV viewing versus online channels versus the cinema. And you could provide a connection to current reports in the newspaper, in the business parts of newspapers in the last 2-3 days, where there's an article about the Odeon and its other half, and I forget which of the other cinema chains has now been merged into the Odeon, and how there are challenges for them. So you've got a business impact as opposed to human impact. So you can sort of kind of follow a whole range of interesting things and develop impact statements that as you read, and just keep your ears open, read widely. And this is really very, very important. You read and read widely. Okay. Sorry, wait a minute. Did that answer your question? Does that help you move forward?
Yeah, it's given me sort of like an idea of how I can broaden my reading and then look later into...
So it helps you broaden it and then narrow back down in the future. Yeah. Okay, next question.
I'm doing something augmenting, but I'm looking at stuff like augmented reality, virtual reality, and wearable tech. And I'm just wondering, because like, how would you compare different stuff like that? How would you go about it?
What you mean in terms of structure?
In terms of structure and in terms of like how to find out stuff that would easily compare.
About wearable, you're thinking of particularly?
Yeah, and also like, I'm not worried this, but just how would you go about comparing X to Y?
Well, if you're looking at technology, ICT type of stuff, and let's look at it, so smart devices and wearable technology, what you've got to think about is how do they relate to each other? And if you think about most of the wearable technology at the moment, they fundamentally require connection by some wireless mechanism, probably Bluetooth, to a smart device like that. So you've got this and the things around your wrist or over your eyes and so on mostly. So at the moment, that's how wearables are actually used in conjunction. Although having said that, some of the sports wearables, you actually don't do that. You actually bring it home, and when you finish your runs or your exercise, you wave it nearby or plug it into your PC or over your wireless network, and it will be automatically downloaded for you. So there's different ways. But then, you've got to think about what's the purpose? Why are we doing all this wearable stuff? Who's benefiting from it? Is it just the manufacturers? What about the people wearing it? Are they just fashion conscious and making a fashion statement, or are they actually going to get real value? So does an X watch, whoever X might be, whether it's Apple, Google or Samsung, whatever, which is sort of like that, a bit bigger, a bit heavier, needs plugging in every night to charge it up, or every 2 or 3 nights, otherwise it goes flat and gives up and becomes useless. And it shows the time with an analog watch on the front of it. Is that really helpful? You have to start thinking about what's going on. Using your own thinking, your own background, your own experience, a thing that makes you unique, to start thinking about understanding what you're reading about wearables, smart devices, or whatever the other topic is. Now, in this topic, it's actually not too big a problem that if you're comparing things which are fairly different. There are going to be times where you've got to be really, really sure, as you quite rightly pointed out, how do I know that I'm comparing the same sorts of things? And that's a really good question. So if I were to say, oh, I want you to compare... Now, I make a statement. Linux is better than iOS. How do you know that they are even remotely similar? What are the definitions? How do you define what better means? You've got to think about context, because you surely wouldn't put iOS onto a PC without a touchscreen. In the same way, you probably wouldn't put Windows 8.1 or 8 at least and Windows RT onto something that doesn't have a touchscreen. And if you go into B203, you'll find something really interesting. If you fire up your PC with Windows 8.1 on it, those big single screens turn out to be touch screens. And if you touch it, up pops a little soft keyboard. Have you found that, folks? In B203? It does. But if you fire it up in Windows 7, it won't do that, because Windows 7 doesn't recognise soft keyboards on the touchscreen. So you have to think about what is relevant in the comparison in a context.